Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to this session of the Great Books, where once a month, our wisdom school here at Ubiquity University brings scholars together to contemplate books that they consider great, books that have transformed their lives in some fundamental way. This month, we have the second of two lectures from Peggy Rubin on the Tempest by William Shakespeare. Surely there's no playwright anywhere in the world or in history that outshines Shakespeare. You know, one thinks of the Greek tragedians, Aeschylus and Sophocles and Euripides. They are also unsurpassed. But certainly in the Western modern tradition, William Shakespeare has spoken to all of humanity. That's one of the characteristics of a great book, that it transcends time. People read Shakespeare all over the world in all kinds of languages, and it speaks clearly and provocatively about the deep issues that move the human soul, whatever your culture, whatever your race, whatever your class. Shakespeare was a world spirit and continues to speak to us. So I'd like to turn it over to Peggy, who you know very dearly as I do, one of the great Shakespearean actors and a lover of Shakespeare. So Peggy, welcome.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you and welcome, friends. Thank you for being here. It has been an absolute delirious joy studying and living with the Tempest in these past weeks and months. I believe the Tempest to be the culminating work of art by a great artist, a great writer, a great maker of plays. And I want to dedicate this time together with all the people who have influenced me and given me some sense of belonging to the great tribe that is the Shakespeare tribe, particularly interesting to those of us who teach it or who act in it or direct it or somehow produce it or have been part of that for years. So it's a great tribe, and you'll be meeting some of them later on in the time in our time together. Just to remind you about the play, we're in the year 1611 in England in the reign of King James I, who came from Scotland to succeed the famous Queen Elizabeth I. Now, Shakespeare's company of players are now the King's men. They were in service to the Queen, but they are now the King's men, and they have been commanded to appear before the King and his company at Whitehall Palace on November 1st, in the year 1611. The thing about The Tempest, I believe, is that it is the play that is pretty much entirely his. And it is also the last one that we know he wrote all of. He wrote many pieces and beautiful pieces of plays later than this one. But this one was, as I said, his own work. And I believe, as many scholars do, that he wrote it at home in Stratford, England, where he was away from the exigencies of being a jobbing playwright, because for many years, and with the same wondrous company of players, one would read something, or he would read something and say, you know, this would make a good play, and let's have it in a couple of months, or let's have it next month. So okay, so now we got this famous book, or this. How about writing another history of one of the kings of England, and we need it next week. So away from all that demand, which was fairly consistent for a very long period of time, I think he was able to relax into what he knew about the theater, and in some very moving ways. This was his farewell to the theater as he practiced it and knew it. And we owe our ability to read and study and love this play to this book. And those words are Ben Jonson's words, the author, Master William Shakespeare, and what he hath left us. In the first folio, there are 36 plays listed, and printed there for us. And we know of 18 of them only because they appeared in this book. And The Tempest is one of those. And his great colleagues who created this book in the 7 years after Shakespeare died, because of their love and honor for him and his work, they made The Tempest the first play in this book. Today, I want to review the story of The Tempest for those of you who may not have remembered it all from the first session, and to acknowledge that the reason for calling this a culminating work is to describe the way he so deftly touches on themes that he explored in earlier plays and that we listed in our earlier visit. The theme of vengeance, of revenge. The theme of magic. The presence, ever present in this play, of music. These are things that we can find in our hearts matter the most to him. The power of the theater and the result of the studying Michel de Montaigne's work on nature versus nurture. Particularly the great theme of the need for freedom and the charming one of love at first sight. Whoever loved that loved not at first sight, says one of his heroes in an earlier play. This is, as I said, his farewell to the theater, I think. And most particularly, I want to pursue what I think of as a golden thread, an inner tempest, and the long journey taken by the main character, Prospero, from magician to world server, from vengeance to forgiveness. In part one, we left the story here. This place in the story celebrating a miraculous accomplishment. And that is he set all this in motion through his magic, on a magical island, a mysterious island. He set all of this in motion, and his beloved daughter, who has been with him in the 12 years since they've been on the island, has fallen madly in love with the young prince who has been shipwrecked on the island. And they are now, and because of that, they are now an acknowledged couple, at least in Prospero's eyes. And they are celebrating. And it is in the middle of this celebration that he recalls himself to what he's got to do. So here's the story in as little a place as I can. Now, Prospero was the Duke, the very powerful Duke of Milan. And he gave, because he was a lover of learning, he gave his power over to his younger brother, whom he adored, or gave the business of running the government over to his younger brother. And he was betrayed by that younger brother, who connived with his enemy, the King of Naples. And together they took over the whole dukedom. The brother, Antonio, made himself the duke, and rather that he was not able, of course, to kill the Prospero and his beautiful daughter, because the people loved them too much, but they did take him out and put him on a leaky boat and shipped him off to nowhere. And this is an ancient image of that. They had not anywhere to go, only they were rescued or helped by a kind old counselor named Gonzalo, who gave them food and water and provisions and even clothing, and most important, Prospero's books, and particularly the books of magic. And by some miraculous chance, they came upon this deserted or strange island in the middle of who knows where. And the people here's the first person they met there. And this is only one of 1,000 different images that you will have of the character of Caliban, one of the richest characters ever written in Shakespeare. And he is this child of a witch who has died, an evil witch, who was left on the island by some sailors from Algiers for her terrible actions. They didn't want to kill her, but they abandoned her on this island. And her child was born and has been raised there. And he's part earth, he's part water, he's part sea, he's part mystery. And he first met Prospero and Prospero's little girl, who was 3 years old at the time. And they were friends, and he taught him, Prospero taught him language and cared for him. And as Caliban says early in the play, plaintively, and then you loved me, and I showed you all the wonders of the island and you loved me. And then Prospero reminds him, but then as Miranda grew toward young girlhood, Caliban attempted to rape her. And he is unrepentant about that. So I had peopled this isle with Calibans, but has since been kept as a slave. And he is imprisoned by Prospero's great power and made to suffer and do the hard work of the island. But there was another character, another mysterious mythic being. And that one, this is from the Oregon Shakespeare Festival recent production of The Tempest, in which the character of Ariel is played by this wondrous young woman. And she has, Ariel, of course, has many servants herself. But she was trapped by the witch in a pine tree for years and years and years. And when Prospero and Miranda got to the island, he heard her cry and somehow freed her from the tree. She is a being totally of the air, and she's the one that manages to do all the magic effects that Prospero demands. And then there is Ariel does perform astounding magic, but is also, in some sense, a slave now and cries for freedom. So we hear these cries both from the two people who were on the island, caught on the island before Prospero and Miranda arrived there. These cries for freedom, freedom, freedom. And Ariel has been promised freedom if he performs the magic that must be done, because by, as he says, an auspicious star now at its zenith, all his enemies, the king of Naples, his own brother, yes, this is the crew, the king of Naples, his own brother Antonio, one of the wicked ones running away, and even the son Ferdinand, even the great old counselor you see there in the middle, all of them have been on a ship on their way from Tunis, where they attended the king's daughter's marriage to the king of Tunis. They're on their way home to Naples, and Prospero raises this great storm with the help of Ariel, this huge tempest, and they are shipwrecked, and they are all magically, of course, brought to shore in several different groups. The mariners go one way, the clown and the steward go another way, the king and his company go one way, and Ferdinand leaps off the boat, the sinking boat, he thinks, with this great famous cry, "Hell is empty and all the devils here." So he leaps off the boat, and everybody, and poor Miranda, the daughter of Prospero, saying, "Please stop this storm. These are great, something wonderful is happening out there. They're beautiful people." And that's when Prospero begins his great tale of how they came to be here, and reveals to her who she is, and that all this tempest has been raised, and all this desire for vengeance, for this betrayal from these people, has been raised up in order that he may effect something that will allow Miranda to get off the island and take her place in the world as she deserves to be. So, of course, what happens is that there is a moment of love at first sight, because Miranda thinks he's a god and he thinks she's a goddess, which is absolutely the perfect thing for people to understand. It is a miracle. and they have fallen in love, as you saw, and been celebrated with it. And there are others, the others have been dispersed about the island. And many of these photographs are from the most recent Tempest that I have seen, which was at the Stratford Festival in Stratford, Ontario, in Canada, including this one. And Caliban has met up with these two. One is a massive drunk, and he saved all the wine. And so he pours the wine on poor Caliban. And then Caliban decides, well, the thing to do is to have you be the king, because I love your liquor, and you will be the king of this island, and all you have to do is kill Prospero. So there's an immediate thought of freedom for Caliban, but also the fact that he will take vengeance also on his master Prospero, who's been so cruel to him as to not allow him to people the island with young Calibans through Miranda. So we have this group having a wonderful times. And in the course of the play, the enemy group have also landed on the island safely. And they are tormented and tortured and not well. They're lost. And the sorrowful thing is that the king thinks his son, the prince, is dead. So there's a great deal of mourning going on about this one. And festival with what I want to mention here, yes, isn't she beautiful? This is Juno giving a blessing at the great ceremony that Prospero has brought together in order to honor the love between the young prince and his beautiful daughter Miranda. But what I want to mention here, and this is inspired by Jean Houston, my great teacher and friend's study of this play, which she does a glorious thing on. I've tried not to borrow from her too much because I wanted to make it mine, but as a mystery play, as a mystery drama, which it certainly is. But one of the things that she likes to quote from other scholars are Shakespeare's myriad-mindedness. And I've thought for years what that phrase might mean, and what I realized that he has the capacity to hold in his mind everything that's happening on stage and off in these plays that he has created. So he knows at every moment what everybody's going through on the island, although he checks it out with his great friend Ariel. Through the whole play, he knows what their motives are, he knows what they're doing, he knows what's happening to them. This is the playwright. He's got everybody, everything in his mind at one time, and it's an amazing skill to just, and I believe he's got their emotional lives, he's got their psychological ins and outs, he's got all of it in one great unbelievable power of the mind. And he demonstrates that so daringly in this play, because he's got this group going off this way and this group going off this way in misery and pain and sorrow, and this group, this man falling in love with a beautiful daughter, and then all of it happening at once. And that's kind of the way the play unfolds, is all of this. And we, as the audience member, remembering that no theater piece makes any sense without an audience. And what an audience of living people before a group of people on the stage who are also alive gather together to perform a miracle of magic. There is a what do they call it, limbic resonance that happens with the feelings that we get, that the actors portray and show so beautifully in their skill, and that we get to feel, and we feel it together. It is one of the primary means of the authenticity of the sense of connection, the limbic resonant connection that we have, feeling with the people on the play who are feeling what the playwright intended, we hope, and what the director intended, we hope. And everybody is feeling, even if the members of the audience are asleep or eating popcorn or thinking about something else, or have gone off on one of the tangents that you can, as an audience member in Shakespeare's plays, you can hear one phrase and go wandering with that, even that, but we're all still one. I think that the theater then gives us a sense of that truth that we are all connected, but it gives it to us in a living, breathing experience. So here, those are the things that have happened in the play so far, and where we are in this one. Now, Prospero is vexed in the middle of this beautiful thing that he's created. And I want to turn now to a sense of the Tempest inside and what happens to him as he makes the great journey from vengeance to forgiveness. And even more important, perhaps, from magician to the server of his world. And to do that, I need to look at a new story. There's a wonderful artist in Oregon and who happens to live in Ashland, Oregon, and her name is Denise Kester, as you can see. And she created this work of art, and I happened to see it as I began working with this play. And I thought, that's a magician. That's a magician. And also, I love the words that she felt as she created the work. And this is absolutely what happens in the inner Tempest, in the inner trajectory of the great character of Prospero. What happens, I think? I am emerging and merging with something new and uncertain. He's calling all this magic together. He does not know for sure how it's going to turn out, and neither do we. It feels like I'm falling, but I am not. It is my shifting point of view that is bending and expanding. And I hope as we study and live into and enjoy this great work of art, that our point of view shifts and widens and bends and expands. So I'm very grateful to Denise for giving me this beautiful jump off point for the inner journey, the renaissance of the heart. And then I want to tell you an old story. And this is part of the great lineage of the tribe of Shakespeare. In England, in the last century, in the first part of the 20th century, Ben Payne became enamored of a particular way that was introduced at that time of doing Shakespeare. And it was to do it not with a lot of scenery, but on pretty much a bare stage, and just to let the imagination of the audience carry the story and let the actors' words be rich enough. Because as we remember, and it was Mr. Payne, who was one of my teachers at the University of Texas, who said once that if Shakespeare had been born any later than he was, he would have been writing like John Milton. And I don't mean to cause any harm to John Milton, who's a fabulous writer, but the thing we want to know about Shakespeare is that he was writing when English was a kind of culminating, fulminating language. And he caught that great wave and created a language. There's a great joke among Shakespeare scholars that Shakespeare invented or created anew or made us look anew at something like 26,000 words. And there are 13 or 12,000 in the King James Bible, which is, theater people laughingly say, means Shakespeare was twice as smart as God. So, but anyway, Mr. Payne worked for 70 years in the theater, at the Abbey Theatre in Ireland, at theaters in England. He was responsible in very great degree to bringing the sense of a repertory company, the one, for example, that Shakespeare had, knowing the actors, knowing the performers, knowing the audience to a very great extent. So a settled repertory company was something that Mr. Payne brought to the world, both England, Ireland, and the United States. And he inspired the man who founded the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. And by that, he has given birth to many Shakespeare festivals around the country and around the world to some extent. And that was Angus Bomer, and he was Mr. Payne's student at the University of Washington, where he was getting a master's degree. He was already a teacher, but he wanted to spend his life in the theater. He was in love with the theater. And it happened that his only job was here in Ashland when he got his master's degree from the University of Washington. The only job in English was in, I think, 1932 or 1933. But anyway, he had Mr. Paine's idea, and he said to Mr. Paine, you know, you need to write about this. And Mr. Paine said, oh no, it's something to be done. It's not something to be written about. But Mr. Paine did write his own memoir of A Life in a Wooden O. Angus wrote his autobiography of a festival, of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. But this is the story I want to tell. Now, Mr. Paine was here in Ashland directing The Tempest for maybe the 10th time in his long career. And Angus went to pick him up one evening to take him to dinner. And he was sitting in an arbor and he was reading The Tempest again, 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 for maybe the, I don't know, several hundredth time. And Angus said to Mr. Paine, Iden, what is that play about? It is a mystery, as we say. And Mr. Paine thought for a very long time. This is the story I heard from Angus. And he said, I believe it is about Prospero's conversion. Now, I don't think he meant necessarily in the Christian terms, but, and we might say in more New Agey terms, his transformation. So that was the theme that set me off on thinking about this theme as an actor might think about it, wanting to play the role of Prospero, as who would not want to. Then I was warned by another Shakespeare scholar who said, listen, be careful about trying to follow a particular theme in Shakespeare, because you will then ignore all the other stuff. And we come back to the myriad-mindedness, because there is the opportunity to study 1,000 different themes and follow threads through it all. But it is still deeply rewarding to wonder, which is what I have done, to see how we can thread, and thinking about it internally, the way an actor might come to it, playing the role of Prospero, to go from vengeance, from that deep desire to punish these people and to I mean, just really to wreak vengeance on them. And I believe here I'm going to go through 7 threads in this great tapestry of forgiveness. And the reason I want to do it is because it's been deeply helpful to me to think about. And I think we all have been betrayed. We've all had those experiences, and how to go from the anger that we might have held on to for, as Prospero did, for 12 years, and how to transform it, how to lighten it, how to make the change that comes in the heart. And in the scene with Miranda, you will recognize this actor. This is I've got a bunch of slides from different productions around the world. This is from the Royal Shakespeare. Here's Patrick Stewart as the glorious Prospero. And he has this, when he's telling Miranda why he's doing the Tempest, why he's doing all of this, he's never told her before. And he says to her, 12 years since, Miranda, 12 years since, thy father was the Duke of Milan and a prince of power. And Miranda says, sir, are not you my father? And then this wonderful Jacobean joke that Shakespeare uses fairly often. Thy mother was a piece of virtue, and she said, thou wast my daughter. And thy father was Duke of Milan, and his only heir and princess, no worse issued. And she says, oh, the heavens, what foul play had we that we came from thence? Or blessed was it we did? And he says, both, my girl, both a blessing and a curse, that they ended up on this island together. So he reveals himself for the first time in their time together as the Duke of Milan. And she, of course, the one to be the Duchess thereof. But I think in that, the two things happen. Because she says, oh, I must have cried so much and made such a thing when we had this terrible long voyage. And he said, oh, a cherubim thou wast. So he tells her how deeply, sweetly she bore the pain of this great voyage, and how she has been since then, since he has taught her everything he knows about life and learning and all that. And so his own love for her is waked up. And I believe also his love for his wife, who died, of course, as women did, perhaps in childbirth. But that the whole sense of love wakes up in that remembrance of how sweet she was. And then the next thread of love that happens to him, this is in a production from the Sacramento Theater Company a few years ago. And this is their interpretation. Aaron Sturley was the director, and his sense of who Ariel was this gorgeous young woman. And here is Prospero. And here, after they've done all the magic that they've been doing, and Ariel, who is invisible to everybody else, of course, except of Prospero, has been watching the young lovers, when Ferdinand and Miranda began to fall in love and do everything they could possibly do to be together, all of that. Ariel's been watching that, and finally says, in the middle of another conversation, because she's puzzled, what is this thing that I've seen between these two young people? And he says, do you love me, master? No. And I think Prospero realizes for the first time that indeed he does. And he says, dearly, my delicate Ariel. So something wakes up as he realizes that this person who has been his slave who he has freed from the pine, but this one who has done his bidding and is so bright and sings all the time. And so his heart is widened by that opening. And what happens next? He even is able to love the man who is the son of his ancient enemy. So here we have Martha Henry, the great actor of Canada, who's been in the theater herself for so many years. This was her culminating performance, although I hope she'll still be on the stage. And it's the most recent Tempest that I've seen. So here she is uniting Prospero's beautiful daughter Miranda with the Prince of Naples, who believes now he is the king of Naples since he thinks his father's gone. So we want to watch how love does things, and it strikes us with such poignancy when we remember it, when we re-enter it again. But it also skirts an edge of loss. So here Prospero is giving the daughter away to a new love and able to open her heart wide enough to embrace Ferdinand as well. So there's more love, but there's also a poignant sense of loss, because she will be going to Naples. At the very least, she will be in Naples. And their time together is over. So there's that, and I think that's what keeps the heart torn may be too strong a word, opened from such a profound place of memory, of sweetness, of difficulty endured together, and of saying goodbye. So there's love growing, and there's a profound awareness of change and the new story arising. And of course, in Shakespeare's time, and because remember that Caliban had tried to rape Miranda. And so one of the things, it's a very funny piece actually, when Prospero puts these two together, he says, now listen, You stay apart from each other. Don't get too close. Don't do too much. No, 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 no. Listen, I don't want any problems here with that. And it becomes a kind of comic interlude about, and of course, the minute they get anywhere near each other, they are together. And then he keeps going, come on, cool it. And so one of the real ways he desires to keep them cool is by presenting not only a great pageant of blessing, but also to this reifies the whole union, this beautiful sense of blessing. So we have the celebration, yes, and the great blessing from the goddesses. This is another Royal Shakespeare from England production. Notice the great goddess Juno with the peacock feathers, always one of her symbols. She's got eyes everywhere, and she is the great goddess of union and marriage. And here she is blessing the pair. But at the same time, and he breaks off this revel, remembering that there are people on this island that he's got some reckoning with. And just to look at the next one, he has driven his enemies into a very poignant and painful place. And these are his words to Ariel. The enemies are in trouble, okay, and in agony and lost. They think they've lost the prince. Now does my project gather to a head, my charms crack not, my spirits obey, and time goes upright with his carriage. How's the day? And Ariel says, on the 6th hour, at which time, my lord, you said our work should cease. So all this takes place in 3 hours. I did say so when first I raised the tempest. Say, my spirit, how fares the king and his followers? So Ariel has taken them into this swamp, and they wander in rain fog and in agony and in who knows what, except the king is so sad because he's lost his son. And Ariel says, confined together in the same fashion as you gave in charge, just as you left them, all prisoners, sir, in the lime grove which weather fends your cell. They cannot budge till your release. The king, his brother, and yours abide all three distracted, and the remainder mourning over them, brimful of sorrow and dismay. But chiefly him that you turn to, good sir, the good old Lord Gonzalo. His tears run down his beard like winter's drops from eaves of reeds. Your charm so strongly works them, that if you now beheld them, your affections would become tender. And Prospero says, dost thou think so? Spirit, my affections would become tender. And Ariel said this incredible, everything shifts line. Mine would, sir, were I human. And Prospero undergoes a massive shift with this one speech. And makes the determination that he clarifies that he's going at it with his left brain and his right brain. And mine shall, hast thou, which art but air, a touch, a feeling of their afflictions, and shall not myself, one of their kind, that relish all as sharply passion as they, be kindlier moved than thou art? Though with their high wrongs I am struck to the quick, yet with my nobler reason gainst my fury do I take part. The rarer action is in virtue than in vengeance. They being penitent, the sole drift of my purpose doth extend not a frown further. Go release them, Ariel. My charms I'll break, their senses I'll restore, and they shall be themselves. I'll fetch them, sir. And he does. Now, this is a short, I'm taking a short psychological interlude here just to remind you who the villains are, okay? This is again from the Sacramento Theater Company's production a few years ago. The good old Lord Gonzalo, you can see him. Now, this is psychological because you can clearly see the enemies and the villains of this piece. You can see the mourning King Alonso on the side. This actually takes place. This is not where they're being driven mad. This is before. And this is a psychological interlude because I want to say that in the scene that this represents, the king is mourning his son, his lost son, and the shipwreck and what's happened and what's going to happen to my country and all the rest of it. And if you have ever been in a place of mourning or distress about something that has happened that you don't know what to do, and you've got friends around you or allies around you, okay, who would you prefer to have around you? Okay, now the two enemies of Prospero, and they turn out to be enemies also of the king, because they plot his death and they plot Gonzalo's death because they have the chance. It's interesting how the villains do show up immediately. The moment there's a chance, murder is what comes to their minds. So which would you rather have around you if you're suffering? Somebody like these two villains do say, well, you know, king, this is all your fault. If we hadn't gone to Tunis, if you hadn't given your daughter to the king of Tunis, this wouldn't have happened. See, everything that's happened is all your fault. It's all your fault. Do you ever have those voices in your own head? It's all your fault. That's sometimes how we can take a Shakespeare play and realize that we're all the characters. But would you rather have somebody who said, you stupid jerk, you did this whole thing, all of it yourself? Anybody got that? Or would you rather have a kind counselor whose whole purpose, had I this island, sir, this is what I would do with it. Would he, as someone who tries to invite you to enjoy and employ your own imagination? Look at this island. Look what we could do here, or what might have happened here, or what this might be about. So he gives his own vision of the gold that surpasses the golden age, that everything would be peaceful and beautiful. He's trying to bring peace and kindness and awareness and imagination to the king's determination to be distressed. So as I said, this is a brief psychological interlude for those of us who suffer distress and have the voices that say it's all your fault, you stupid jerk, and the ones who say, now just remember you have an imagination, there is someplace else to dream on, there's something else to be done. So as I said, that brief period now ends. And he goes all the way. Now, this is miraculous in the fact that it happens immediately after saying that, okay, I can forgive. I have it in me to forgive. And then he does this beautiful farewell, which I think is also at some deep level Shakespeare's farewell to the magic he has created in the theater, all these years of life in the theater, the magic that he has brought forth. And what's interesting, I like to think that among all the books and teachings that Shakespeare must have absorbed in his life, he probably had the Roman poet Ovid memorized, because this beautiful speech is inspired by one of Ovid's accounts, by Ovid's account of Medea going out in the early morning and gathering the dew of rejuvenation, which she's gathering in the early part of her great story, her painful story. She's doing it to renew the age of her beloved Jason's father, to bring him back to health and life. So she's gathering these wondrous things, the dew of that. She's out with her bare feet. This beautiful speech by Ovid. And here is Shakespeare loving it, honoring it, and saying in Prospero's voice, Ye elves of hills, brooks, standing lakes and groves, and ye that on the sands with printless foot do chase the ebbing Neptune and do fly him when he comes back, you demi-puppets that by moonshine do the green sour ringlets make, whereof the yew not bites, and you whose pastime is to make midnight mushrooms that rejoice to hear the solemn curfew, by whose aid, weak masters though you be, I have bedimmed the noontide sun, called forth the mutinous winds, and twixt the green sea and the azured vault set roaring war. To the dread rattling thunder have I given fire, and rifted Jove's stout oak with his own bolt. The strong-based promontory have I made shape, and by the spurs plucked up the pine and cedar. Graves at my command have waked their sleepers, oped and let them forth by my so potent art. And here's the great shift, another great shift. But this rough magic I hear abjure. And when I have required some heavenly music, which even now I do, to work mine end upon their senses that this airy charm is for, I'll break my staff, bury it certain fathoms in the earth, and deeper than did ever plummet sound, I'll drown my book. And then Ariel brings forth the wanderers. And even though he has absorbed his rough magic, he watches them and speaks to each of them while they are still in a trance. All his enemies come before him. The only one who is repentant is the king, Alonso, who's had Prospero on his mind all this time. But just by his presence, the great brain fog that has gotten them all caught begins to fade. And he uses words to say that that's what's happening. They have come themselves. And slowly but surely, he speaks to each one of them as they come awake, including the great Gonzalo, the sweet, old, kind Lord. And he wakes up King Alonso and says, I'm Prospero. He's got his own clothes on again. And tells Alonso that I'm so sorry you've lost your son, because I tell you, I've also lost a precious thing. And Alonso said, what? He says, my daughter. When? Says Alonso. In the same Tempest. Oh, and the king says this prophecy, and he doesn't know it. Would that your daughter and my son were still alive as king and queen of Naples. And then Prospero says, well, let's have a look. So they draw a kind of curtain. And there the children are playing chess and playing love and making love. And everyone rejoices with such tenderness. And even, now this is the great soul piece of Prospero that he shows us. The king is penitent. And what's interesting is that Caliban and the drunkards who were intending to murder Prospero, but they've been confused, and Caliban realizes that the ones he thought were wonderful were just drunken idiots. And his beautiful, he also it comes at a very special moment. And this is when Prospero is again whole. This again is from the wonderful production at the Sacramento Theater Company, and where even Caliban is a woman in this play. And it makes me laugh, because I think what woman in the world wouldn't just love to play Caliban? So here is one here. And what's happened, this is a kind of demonstration of everybody on the stage, including the villains and the drunkards and Ariel and all Ariel's followers. Because what Prospero says that is so moving and so special when the drunkards are claimed by the king. This thing of darkness, he says to Caliban, I acknowledge mine. And somehow I deeply believe the great love that was there between them in the first place is restored. And my wonderful friend Hilary Tate, who is a great scholar and teacher of Shakespeare, says that Prospero has been caught loving only Ariel, who is the being of fire and air, and has ignored the watery earth parts. And now he is whole again by saying, I acknowledge mine. And in fact, of course, all of these beings in this wondrous piece of work are part of him. And he has reached the end of his great journey and is determined without his magic. This is one of the things that's hard for me to get. He gives up his magic in order to go back into the world to serve his people as the Duke of Milan, where every third thought shall be my grave, he says. And I'm trusting that the other 2/3 of his thinking will be to care for his people. So he goes from magician back into the world to serve the world with all his skill, with all his wisdom, with everything he's gained. And here's what he says. Okay. So Prospero's journey is accomplished. Yes. So sorry, I wasn't clear about that. And now I want to turn to the creator, a little more fully to the creator. And this present month, I asked to be allowed to talk about Shakespeare in April because this is the month that he was born and the month in which he died. So, and he's got several comments about April, but I want those of you, if you're in a place where April is bestowing herself with all her glory on the world, just to take a deep breath and be in that at the moment. And from you, this sense of love that Shakespeare has for almost anything he's writing toward. From you have I been absent in the spring when proud-pied April, dressed in all his trim, hath put a spirit of youth in everything, that heavy Saturn laughed and leapt with him. And the next one, please, just to see his, from how the spring of love resembleth the uncertain glory of an April day, which now shows all the beauty of the sun, and by a cloud takes all away. Yeah. So back to Shakespeare, who just to honor his life in this great month. This house was fairly new when he was born. His parents had lost 2 children. And the uncertain glory of an April day is also a touch of what happens to life, what happens, that this great creator was born at a very vulnerable time on every possible level of life. Religious life was being torn asunder in lots of different ways. And he was born, we think, on April 23rd, because that is the day he died. And it's a few days before his formal christening, which was at this wondrous Holy Trinity Church. He's baptized there in the company of great friends. His parents had already lost 2 children, so he was the first living child. And within 1 month, the uncertain glory of an April day, within 1 month, plague visited the town of Stratford and decimated it. Literally 1/10 of the people who lived there died. So it is a miracle and a mystery that he survived. Now, I think also the measure of a great book is its generativity. And we have wits to read and praise to give. So we read the book, but what the book has done for other books. Now, this is a picture. This next one, excuse me, is a picture of a few of my own small collection of books inspired by Shakespeare's books. So one thing great book does is inspire other books, and great writer inspires other books. And also the thing that he inspires is a company of players. As I said, Shakespeare wrote for actors he knew, and I want to pay homage to Richard Burbage, probably the greatest actor that ever lived, who played all his heroes, including Prospero. And the others, the ones who loved and cared for him and managed to hold on somehow or find his scripts so they could get that folio put together years after Shakespeare had died. So there's something that generates from it. And part of it is the wonder and beauty of working together as a community, sometimes a very contentious community, but we have the enormous privilege anytime we have the chance to wander into Shakespeare's mind and feel renewed and blessed there, to the extent that we can get there, to the extent that we can. And so as an act of magic, I'm going to ask you to watch now something of the person of my personal life and history of a member of that tribe, a very devoted member of that Shakespeare tribe, who is my personal perfect Prospero. His name is James Edmondson. He has never played this role, and he was born to play it. So it's both an honoring of him who still live, and of this great role, and to imagine him as I look at some of the pictures of his earlier time, other roles. He is a magician. He is a director. Here he is in the mid-70s directing Twelfth Night. And he has an absolutely breathtakingly beautiful voice, so he was an actor. Here he is playing one of, I don't know how many kings he's played, many of them Shakespeare's kings. This is King Richard II, which he played to a fare thee well. And here he is discussing the problem of the crown and all of that. So in some of the roles that he's played in the past. And here he is again as a director. This one is Romeo and Juliet, and he's standing there chastening or talking to or befriending the guy who played Mercutio and the man who played Mark Murphy. This was here at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. Mark Murphy and Dennis Howard, who played Romeo and Mercutio. And he's also, perfectly happy not always to play kings or directors. So here he is in a wonderful play called Wild Oats. It's just he's had a life. He's been in the theater since he was in high school, and he claimed his own. Here he is as the king of Bohemia, of Sicily, in The Winter's Tale, Vowing Friendship. Here he is playing Bernard Shaw in a wonderful piece called Dear Liar. So he has this plethora of, he's played, he's acted, he's directed, and he's taught. He's a fabulous, fabulous teacher of Shakespeare, and he is a center for Shakespeare in so many, in his own being, and his great partner of many years, founded the Great River Shakespeare Festival in Winona, Minnesota, and they have worked there together. But here he is at the Pacific Conservatory for Performing Arts as King Lear. And here he is again as Lear here at the festival. So he's played kings, he's played servants, and his act as a world server came in the middle of the AIDS crisis, when he persuaded the artistic director, Jerry Turner, to spend some days in the summer with the whole company and everybody in town who would be willing to be part of it, to come together as a festival, but to come together to raise money, to do a huge fundraiser for the people suffering with AIDS and their families, and or HIV. And over the years, and this has been many years, this was the earliest one, and then he was saying this was a more recent one of the magnificent amount of money that the festival raised, but everybody's wanting to serve Jim's idea. It's called the Daedalus Project, and to give everything they have in every way they can, both their love and support for people suffering from this terrible disease. And over the years, they've done so much. So that's how he is a magician and a world server. Here he is as the stage manager, directed by his wonderful partner and genius, Paul Barnes. And I want to remind us of what Thornton Wilder says in Our Town, because this is also, he also was certainly a playwright inspired by Shakespeare and a bare stage. And he talks about this beautiful play. It is not offered as a picture of life in a New Hampshire village or a speculation about the conditions of life after death. And this is what I want to leave or begin to leave this great event with, is an attempt to find a value above all price for the smallest events in our daily life. A value, and I think that this is a thread that Wilder would have caught from Shakespeare, because Shakespeare showed so many wonderful, elegant, strange moments of daily life. And also one of the other roles that Jim played with great wonder was the lead in William Saroyan. And the character sits in a bar and pulls the world to him. And the playwright has in his prologue to the play these beautiful words: in the time of your life, so live so that in that wondrous time you shall not add to the misery and sorrow of the world, but shall smile at the infinite delight and mystery of it. And this is a mysterious horse belonging to a friend named Trish Boersma, who does beautiful work with horses and their great hearts. And this horse's name is Mystic. What else? And this was after one of Jim's recent illnesses, that they had a meeting of infinite delight and mystery. So Jim is one of thousands of wonderful people, wonderful beings who are part of the great Shakespeare tribe and who have done what they can to smile at the infinite delight and mystery of life. Here's the epilogue to the Tempest. And it is, and also I believe, the last of Shakespeare's way of saying farewell. And this is how I imagine Jim would look after he has spoken it. And I'm just going to read it because it is so touching. This is Prospero saying, "Now my charms are all o'erthrown, and what strength I have is mine own, which is most faint. Now 'tis true, I must be here confined by you," he's speaking to the audience, "or sent to Naples. Let me not, since I have my dukedom got, and pardoned the deceiver, unrepentant." We have no idea whether that guy actually is repentant or not. He never says a word after they come back together, and Prospero says, "I forgive you." We don't know. And Prospero doesn't know either, but he still forgives him. So, okay, forgive me for that. "Pardon the deceiver. Dwell in this bare island by your spell." He's speaking, as I said, to the audience, "with the help of but release me from my bands with the help of your good hands. Gentle breath of yours my sails must fill, or else my project fails, which was to please. Now I want spirits to enforce, art to enchant, and my ending is despair, unless I be relieved by prayer, which pierces so that it assaults mercy itself and frees all faults. That's prayer. As you from crimes would pardoned be, let your indulgence set me free. And a wise audience, particularly for this perfect Prospero, would do nothing but beat their hands and shout, thank you to both the playwright, the ones who are daring enough to try to put this incredible vision on a stage, a wooden O. And it's all about, it was all a play. All of it was a play. And to close this time together, I'm going to use a speech that comes in the golden mean time of the play. And many people think is also a reminder. I like to think of it as absolutely the most beautiful demonstration of the Buddhist principle of impermanence that can be imagined. And also, to some extent, that sense of the non-self that is also full, the emptiness, the no-thingness, which gives us gives rise to fullness. It's not self-centered, but it is allowing us to embrace all. Our revels now are ended. These are actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits and are melted into air, into thin air. And like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inherit, shall dissolve. And like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. Thank you for being part of this voyage, this journey into the capacity and the possibility of living free. You notice that the last word in the play is the word free. Set me free. So thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Peggy. That was beautiful. I love the juxtaposition of the outer story and the inner story. And that really speaks to the grandeur of Shakespeare. But I want to just probe just a little bit on your opening comments that you found the Tempest of all the works of Shakespeare in some ways the most meaningful to you. And, you know, given Romeo and Juliet and Richard III and Merchant of Venice and some of the other Hamlet, some of the other great plays, I'd love to just hear a little more about what about the Tempest has spoken to you. Is there something in your life when you encountered it in a particularly powerful way? We'd just love to hear out of all the works of Shakespeare why the Tempest is so meaningful to you. And then all the doctoral students, please start raising your hands, and we'll call on you after Peggy comments.
Well, I'm with Angus Bowmore on that, because when the people asked him what was his favorite play, he says, it's the one I'm working on right now. What's your favorite role? It's the role I'm doing right now, even if it's some tiny person. So it's partly because I've had this great opportunity to spend time on it, but somehow it was the one that leapt out to me, maybe because I'm so close to the end of my own life, and recognizing that in so many ways this was Shakespeare's final piece, his farewell, his acknowledgement of the wonder and power of the theater, and his farewell to it. So, but that whole thing that plays, I've never been in it. I've only seen it and seen it and seen it, and it is the most wonderfully gender fluid of all of Shakespeare's plays, because you got people playing all the roles, all different sexes and persuasions, but I think I don't know quite how to answer that adequately, Jim. I just have spent this time on it, and it did call to me. And believe me, I was thinking earlier about King Lear because I've been reading and studying a wonderful book by Shapiro about the year. He does wonderful things on the different years and what happened in the year that he wrote King Lear. So it's pretty impressive. And partly I think because it is the one that we know that we cannot find any sources for except that famous shipwreck story, an actual thing that happened. And so it came from him. It came from him only. It wasn't, like I said, he was a jobbing playwright, and okay, so here's this old story, so let's make a play out of it, or let's do this with it, or let's make it this way. And he had to do it working under white heat. And we don't have that sense with this one, that this one is much more peaceful. This one is more, I think we come closer. I'm blathering, I'm sorry. I think we come closer to the mystery of his mind with this one.
There you go.
So it touches my heart because it is, to the extent that anybody can get anywhere near that incredible mind, it grabs us in the possibility of resting like a Russian doll, thousands of resting inside that space, that spacious space.
But so a powerful statement, Peggy, that we come closest to the mystery of his mind. Just what jumped in my mind was Goethe's Faust. And I remember reading that about Faust, that was the work of Goethe, where you access the most exuberantly the mysteries that were just tumbling around the mind of that extraordinary genius, Wolfgang Goethe.
Yeah.
So The Tempest did that. I hadn't taken in that it was his last play. So that would...
The last complete play. The last one was all him. There, Henry VIII is another one that was written later, and he wrote big, beautiful pieces of. But that was, again, his participation as a world server himself in the sense of England, having a beautiful... The English became England in part because of him. Elizabeth I had a lot to do with it, but before they were, Gloucestershire men and this one. But I think somehow there is a pulling it together, pulling union into the possibility for good and ill.
Beautiful, thank you. Well, let's turn to our students, and we'll start with Ann Sias, and then Jonathan McLeod, and then Crystal Steinberg. Ann, do you want to come to the mic? I think Matt has turned your mic on. Ann?
I think he may have turned my mic on by mistake.
Okay, well, let's go with Jonathan McLeod first, and then Ann, if you're there, we'll take you next, and then Crystal. Jonathan.
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, what incredible work you have done in order to understand this so fully and beautifully. It's an exquisite testament actually to your own mind and character and dedication to this. It's exquisite.
Generous, Jonathan. Thanks.
And a couple of notices, which is really interesting because as a doctoral student here at Ubiquity University, one of the things that I really love and emulate about, of course, our beloved Dr. Garrison is that he has this ability to thread across contexts. It's like a basket weave, right, of these things, because here we are in a Shakespeare class and all of a sudden he's pulling down Goethe, right? So I'm like, okay, there it is. I'm really fascinated about this limbic resonance when it comes to this last piece that you mentioned about Elizabeth I and Shakespeare, and it comes actually from my own family lineage. I'm a direct descendant of King James IV of Scotland, which of course happened before James VI and James I of England, but still in that line, which was around 1604 that happened. And so this limbic resonance is a really fascinating topic because it seems to be like an alchemical, transpersonal sort of somatic expression because it crosses that border between thought and feeling. And I thought you might expand on that just a little bit because I know, like, when you walk into a cathedral or you walk into a Shakespearean theater, there's a resonance there that comes with the sacredness and the performance and the energetic resonance that's reflected from the things that have happened there. But you said that, and it really, really was a hook for me. So I thought you might expand on that in how you think this all stitches together, because I think that limbic resonance is really what England, certainly with Elizabeth and with Victoria, that made this energetic container that made the sun never set on the empire.
Yeah. Oh, wow. You're a pretty good threader yourself, Jonathan. Well, okay, so one of the books I've been reading recently, partly for the Rose Circles, and for Madonna Rising. Let me go get it. Okay, it's called A General Theory of Love, and I've studied the term limbic resonance a lot, but I think that's where there's the best thing in it. Now people, it's written by three teachers of psychiatry, and do they take psychiatry to the bar to be discussed in the book? But let me just get it for you, Jonathan. Can you hold a second? I guess you can.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's interesting that you trace your lineage back to King which?
So it's easy when you're a Scot and you're from a royal line because every time you cut a tooth, somebody writes it down somewhere. And so 12 generations ago, King James IV of Scotland was
Four.
the King James IV of Scotland was my direct heir, and he had three sons. And the short story is that his oldest son died in battle with him against the English, and then his middle son became King James V. The middle son had a younger brother, and as you know, Shakespeare would very well point out that the fingerprints on the knife between your shoulder blades is often the younger brother's. And so he did what any good young prince, now king, would do, which was married him off to a German in the Habsburgs family and sent them off to the second German settlement in what is now Roanoke, Virginia. And here I am. And that name actually stuck, the name that, and of course, you strip his nobility, you strip his title, and you make him take his wife's name so that no one knows he's of you.
Yeah.
And that name was Wilhite, and the Wilhite name remained in our family until my grandmother. So it's a very clear line, and in fact, it goes back beyond him all the way to the von Oldenburgs of Copenhagen in the 8th century.
Wow, wow, that is an honorable and glorious thread.
Yes.
I've got a lot of Scott in me, but I'm the steward people. Okay, so this is the General Theory of Love. This is the first edition. There were three afterwards, and some of the scholars, hit it for several reasons, but it is a really remarkable and enchanting kind of book. And he speaks a lot about the difference between what they call the limbic brain and the cognitive brain, and that the limbic brain receives and catalyzes molecules different from what the cortex does, is one of the things that I think I understand from that book. I'm just touching into it and trying to get it, but he's one of the places that I have heard. They're one of the places where I heard the whole thing about limbic resonance, and it occurred to me that that's exactly as you say. When you go into a cathedral, you go into a great theater, you feel it. You go into a symphony hall, it's all there. It's all there.
Thank you again.
That was a question, Jonathan. Oh, it was about that. Yeah, okay. Got it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Thank you, Jonathan. My people came over in 1686 from Provence. They were Huguenots. They were fleeing the Catholic persecutions of Louis the XIV. And if you read Barbara Tuchman's book, March of Folly, she counts the expulsion of the Huguenots from France as one of the most idiotic and stupid decisions in history, from Troy to Vietnam. And so lineage is always interesting to me. And I know, Peggy, you have a very long lineage. I don't remember the details, but if I remember correctly, you go back quite a ways.
We've all been run out of perfectly decent
We've all been
countries.
around for a long time, that's for sure, whatever our lineage. I think we anyway.
Yeah, so we'll go now to Crystal Steinberg. Crystal, please come on.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for the gift of both of these presentations. I fell in love with The Tempest in undergraduate school. I've seen it performed 17 times in different contexts, and I just believe that, yes, I believe it's a play that says we don't need outside magic to love and forgive. It's within the human heart. And I just wanted to connect with what Jonathan was sharing in terms of responding to Peggy's statement about the sun never setting on the empire and bringing England together. It was really interesting that over the Easter holiday, there were so many online readings of The Tempest that we could participate in. The San Diego Shakespeare Society had a presentation where we could come and read parts or be the audience, and a couple of other places also did it. And so I'm wondering if there's some hope in this play for the sun not setting on the United States and the democracy that we strive toward.
What a good thought. What a good thought. And one of the fearful and poignant themes that Shakespeare, he would have been probably understanding of the idea of colonies. They had established colonies in the United States at that time, and because of the shipwreck of the Sea Venture in 1610, they had established a colony in Bermuda, which had kindly welcomed all the survivors from the shipwreck. But I think The Sun Never Sets was a colonial statement of England owning the world, which I think is a terrible mistake. But I would like for the sun not to set on democracy, and I appreciate that thought enormously. And of course, in Shakespeare's day, the word democracy was a dirty word, so the people could not be trusted. And we have carryovers of that belief that certain people cannot be trusted with voting, for heaven's sake. Because and a democracy does rest on an informed electorate. So we're in as fragile a state, I think, as England could ever have been in. And it was under the part of it, the religious thing. The Huguenots were one thing in France, my goodness, but the same thing in a smaller way or in a more poignant way was happening between the Catholics and King Henry VIII's new church, the Church of England, and Shakespeare's family was at least allied with Catholics, and many people believe that his family was still Catholic, even though it was absolutely illegal to be a Catholic, pretty much in Elizabeth's time. So, and the thing of being a nation, and what I think, as I imagine if Shakespeare were alive today, he might want to write a play about this blessed isle that he might call the earth, and all its amazing people, and how they might find ways, threads of understanding and forgiveness, and manage to live together in some essence that was peaceful. Thank you, Crystal, for giving me my meander, but thanks. May the sun not set on democracy. I'm for that for sure. Thank you.
It's also very interesting, Peggy and Crystal, that the Tempest is gaining sort of a resurgence. You know, it was noted, I think, in one of our Humanity Rising sessions a few months ago, that George Orwell's 1984 has become a bestseller again, you know, after Trump and January 6th. So there is something in the collective psyche that is responding to works of literature. So, you know, you think of even in the title, The Tempest, you know, the world is in a tempest right now. And the outer tempest and the inner tempest are mirroring each other. I was just reading an article just this morning that they're finding out that one of the effects of the pandemic has been, there's been a rise in all kinds of eating disorders.
Oh, really?
And you know, psychological challenges, mental illnesses, abuse, alcoholism, drug abuse. So that we're in a inner and outer tempest. So I mean, I'm very pleased, Crystal, that you shed that one little fact about how many times the Tempest is being performed online and so forth. There's something in the world psyche that is needing the redemptive catharsis that Shakespeare always provides through his literature. You know, and we have a few minutes left, Peggy. I would love to hear your wisdom, your comment on this relationship of the Tempest to the pandemic, you know, the inner and outer turmoils that are afflicting our time, as just sort of a concluding remark on your two masterful lectures on this particular work of Shakespeare.
Thank you, Jim. Well, I want to say on the other side of the pandemic, and I have observed it among my friends who are artists and creators, that that many people have gone inward and been looking at ancient images and ancient wounds and ways to work through them. I've heard, I don't know how many people say that that's part of what's been happening in the course of this lockdown, you know, and enclosure sense. It has, as you said, given rise to other things as well that are terrifying and painful. And we've all had to look at death again with different eyes. So that's every third thought will be my grave, as the gentleman says. But I have found that among the friends who are creators, they have worked, they are putting out material, they are writing, they are making art of every kind. And it is somehow, that is also a generative force that sits within the human, I think, even in the midst of terrible plague. And certainly Shakespeare kept writing, as a creator, kept writing, no matter what was going on. King Lear, written in the year of the gunpowder plot, which could have killed the entire royal family and most of Parliament and half of London. So if it had succeeded, so we've got these ferocious, tempestuous waves winnowing over us and around us and tearing us, but also opening, I think, to some profound new understandings. Michael Meade says it very beautifully, that we're either going to come out of this better than we were when we went in, or we're going to come out of it worse. And the great hope, indeed his great teachings about coming through it with the soul wanting to be transformed into a new kind of understanding. So may it be so. And that doesn't deny any of the anguish.
Yeah. Well, you know, as Shakespeare said, you know, no great act was ever done with a single motive. I think that's one of the truest lines of Shakespeare that I know. And as you're pointing out, the tempest is the tempest. And it's for good and it's for ill. And Prospero and the whole cast of characters We're going in and out, not only of the inner and the outer, but of the good and the evil, the light and the shadow, but in some mysterious and powerful way, ultimately with a redemptive outcome.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful.
Claiming it all, claiming it all.
Yeah, claiming it all. And I think that's what's up
mine. I
for
acknowledge
humanity
that.
right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to claim it all, and it's us, and it's the world. So thank you, Peggy, and thank you, everyone. Now, we're going to take a break now over um, uh, the summer. But before we do that, we're going to be um, having Mary Oliver, Carol Baker on Mary Oliver, the great, great poet, American poet who died recently, who is one of the sublime poets of the 20th century. And that's going to be our next great work is Mary Oliver's Devotions, that collection of poetry. So that's next on the great book. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Peggy. This was absolutely sublime. You did your friend Shakespeare real justice. We salute you.
Thank you very much. It's been wonderful to be here. And as I said, the joy, the delirious joy of having the opportunity to wander into that wondrous mind and that great creation and just live there for a while. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you people for listening and watching.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again soon for the great books. And Mary Beth, thank you for guiding us through that beautiful, gorgeous PowerPoint. It illuminated Peggy's remarks quite masterfully. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. I couldn't have done it without her. Thank you, Mary Beth.
I just want to say how much it has been my pleasure because you have allowed me to become a part of this beautiful piece of work, Peggy. And I am so grateful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye.